Hello, I am Jessica Cooper, and I researched on how researchers are using wastewater to grow microalgae for biofuels. So my area of focus was using algae for biofuels. I found that microalgae in the literature were found to be superior to land-based crops for development into biofuels. The way that algae can create a fuel is that they use photosynthesis to convert solar energy into biomass, and then this biomass can be converted into fuels through three various strategies. The biomass could be converted into biodiesel by kind of processing the lipids, the fat content, could be converted into bioethanol through fermentation, or converted into biogas, typically methane gas, which could be produced during anaerobic respiration of the algae. So some shortcomings though with growing algae for biofuels. It does sound like a great idea, but they found that algae culture technologies are very expensive and energy intensive. So it was found that large scale production currently is far too costly to be very realistic. And so this is really where the focus of my project was how can we make the algae growth more sustainable? I found that researchers are trying to couple the growth of algae using wastewater. And so wastewater is perfect because it provides an inexpensive access to nutrients and water. And a kind of a dual benefit is that as the algae is growing, yes, it is creating biomass that can be used to make biofuels, but it can also purify the water, can remove pollutants from that water. It also can remove some carbon dioxide from the atmosphere as well, which is an added bonus. So that's kind of a dual benefit of this idea. So I found that in the past 3 years, there have been 3 different approaches used to use wastewater to grow algae for biofuels. These are the 3 that I focused on. The first was an article on sugarcane processing facility wastewater, the second on a tannery wastewater, and the third was using residential wastewater, all to grow algae for biofuels. So the first study was using a sugarcane processing facility wastewater to grow algae, so coupling those 2 processes. The study was focused on an Ethiopian sugarcane processing and ethanol production facility. It was found that they could couple the wastewater from the factory and the flue gas as a source of water and CO2 to grow the microalgae. The big idea, though, is that this study was just a hypothetical idea, so it was trying to come up with the numbers as to would this be possible, but it was not actually carried out. It was a case study approach of how this could hypothetically work. So the plan would be to grow algae using the wastewater from the facility. That algae would then be removed for processing through various strategies: settling, dissolved air flotation, and centrifugation. And then that biomass could be used to create the 3 different types of biofuel. Primarily, they were focusing on biodiesel. Any remaining algae would be used to create biogas, which would have been methane. And then their third idea was that any remaining from that could be converted into a biofertilizer, which could grow more algae in the future. And so they did find that this would be a positive idea. So they found that they would create a lot of algal biomass by coupling the growth of algae with this sugarcane processing facility. They'd be able to create a lot of biodiesel, biogas, and biofertilizer. And then the big idea, though, is that they found that the ratio of how much energy they would get to the energy that they had to put in was actually positive. It was a 4.8 ratio, meaning that this process would in fact make more energy than was needed to start the whole process. So while yes, that this study did find that the coupling of the growth of microalgae with the wastewater would be beneficial, the major limitation is that this was just hypothetical and based on calculated projections. So it could maybe have some limitations to generalizing or actually implementing it in real life. The second study was on using a tannery wastewater. So just some background on that. So the tanning industry does use large amounts of water just to process the hides. And that water that they produce does have a lot of waste. It's a major source of pollution. It contains both organic and inorganic pollutants within that tannery wastewater. So the study was focusing on how could we capitalize on that wastewater and try to both purify it and also grow some algae for biofuels. So tannery wastewater was obtained from a treatment plant in China. They grew 3 different strains of microalgae in the water. They used various dilutions of the wastewater. They took various samples of kind of the sugar, the chlorophyll, the biomass content at the end. And what they found was it was a success. The algae grown in the tannery wastewater had an increased growth and higher chlorophyll and sugar content compared to the algae that was grown in just traditional water. This also meant that the biomass and total lipids produced were higher as well, and we know that those are the things that we need to create the biofuels, so it was positive for that as well. On the purification side, the algae did remove some ammonium and phosphorus from the tannery wastewater. And big picture, if this was implemented, the study predicted that it would save about 80% of the energy that is typically used to treat and clean the wastewater. 80% could be saved if the algae did it for us. And an implication I thought was interesting is the study found something called the lag phase, which is the idea that if an algae is put in this toxic kind of wastewater, usually if they have less tolerance, they have slower growth, which I think makes sense, but some implications for other studies was that you really do have to be careful picking the correct strain of algae to grow in the water in order to be successful and create enough biomass. And the last study that I focused on was found in India, and they used residential wastewater to grow algae. They created something called an algal flowway, which is like a thin platform where the algae can grow as a biofilm. They used wastewater from a residential area that had about 200 homes, and they were interested to see how the biomass and lipid content of the algae was growing in this flowway that they created. So they did find that the algae biomass varied seasonally. So no surprise that the most biomass was created during the summer, around April to May, which kind of follows where they had higher sunlight available, more photosynthesis could occur. They did also find that algae were an energy efficient, cost-effective, and eco-friendly way to remove excess nutrients from the wastewater. And another interesting finding was that in those algal flowways, about more than 90% of them were diatom dominated, which are good at producing lipids, which is best for creating biodiesel. So it proved that this could be another way to grow the algae for biofuels. So as I was evaluating this study, interesting things that the results were significantly more successful than other studies, probably because this study took place in more of a warmer tropical kind of environment as opposed to more of a temperate environment. Another interesting thing about the study is they used native algae, so that does make it hard to generalize the results. So as the seasons changed, so did the algae composition, and so as a result, so did the amount of lipids and biomass that they found. So it's hard to maybe apply this to other parts of the world where they would have maybe different algae. So that could be a potential limitation. And so as a biology teacher, I was thinking of ways that these studies could be tied to teaching in my classroom, and I found that the idea of growing algae for biofuels in wastewater could be connected to 2 main ideas: the idea of ecology and the idea of cellular energy. So the first one would be in our ecology standards. In the biology standard, there is a standard about nutrient cycles, specifically elemental cycling of carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, or hydrogen. And I found that students really do struggle with understanding the nitrogen and the phosphorus cycles. And so I thought that tying in the idea of the algae growing in the wastewater could be a perfect way to make these cycles more engaging for students. Specifically, I could talk about how the algae grew in the tannery wastewater and was using the phosphorus found in there. And I thought this could be an engaging way to show students that these elements are important for life on Earth. A lot of times they're not familiar with what the importance of nitrogen and phosphorus are. Another main way that this could be implemented into my teaching is in our human impact units. There is a specific standard on how students should design a solution to reduce the impact of a human activity. And so I thought that I could show them the example where they use the sugarcane processing facility as a way to reduce the impact of greenhouse gas production by the algae using the CO2 from the factory, growing the algae as a way to use biofuels instead of maybe fossil fuels. So I thought that maybe students could be inspired from this. They could develop another solution creating algae. Maybe we could do a project where students research alternative ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So I thought this could be a great introduction to kind of our human impact units. And then lastly, of course, this will tie in great with the cell energy unit because algae undergo the process of photosynthesis to create energy. So I thought all the studies could be used to show how algae uses photosynthesis to create the biomass. It could be a great way for students to see some kind of real-world picture ideas for photosynthesis. A lot of times they get bogged down in the details of the process, so it'll be nice to see some application. And I also thought another interesting example to share with them would be about the idea of biogas as an example of anaerobic respiration. And so they could even research that closer as we're learning about cell respiration. And here are my references there. So thank you so much for listening. Bye, guys.